I remember when I was, I think I was 15 years old. Thank you. I'll start again. That was a very poor start. I remember when I was 15 years old. Can you picture it? Young, fresh-faced and lovely. Not quite. I had a dear friend of mine who said, I did not enjoy my youth. My youth was enjoyed by others. That was not the case in my case. But I do remember when I was 15 years old. And I was living in Devon, in the middle of nowhere, miles away. Leon's seen the house I used to live with. I mean, it just looked like it had been swamped by greenery. It was 1.5 miles from the nearest village. It was about 5 miles from the nearest town. And for a 15-year-old who knew they were gay and had just come out, it was a wretched place to live. So what I did was, I had a little moped at the time, and I travelled to Exeter, because I knew in Exeter, now Exeter is hardly a throbbing metropolis. No, Exeter is hardly a flesh pot. It's a cathedral city with about 100,000 people. It's very, you know, like cathedral cities are, well, it's a staid and conservative place in a rural community. And I knew that there was a gay pub there called the Acorn. Now, I tell you, living in a village at the age of 15, your mind plays some tricks on you. And you assume that a gay pub in a town like Exeter is going to be like something like San Francisco. You know, that's just the solution to all your dreams. It's where liberation lies. So I got on my moped and I drove my moped 15 miles to Exeter. And I found out where the Acorn was. And I drove around it. And then I drove around it again. And then I drove around the block a few times. And then I parked in the parking lot and I sat there for about an hour. And then I went home. The following week, I had another outing. This time I went to Torquay, which was a seaside resort. This was about 30 miles away from where I lived. And I knew there were several gay places there. Torquay had a reputation, my God. So I drove all the way down to Torquay. And I found the pub. And I looked at the pub. And I drove around the block, and then I sat at the bottom of the street for a while, and then I drove back home again. You see a pattern developing here. I think 5 times went by before I actually got the courage to go through the door into the Acorn. And it was a grotty little pub. I mean, it was real spit and sawdust. I mean, there are a few bars in New Orleans, a bit like the Acorn, but I'm not going to say what they were in case they take offense. But suffice it to say, it was rough. But 2 women befriended me and got chatting to me and gave me a lifeline, which at the time possibly saved my life. Now, if I'd have given way to the fear, I still would have been sat in the parking lot. I would have gone back to that tiny little village, Tipton St. John, where I was the only gay person, the local town where at school I was supposedly the only gay person, and I lived in a community which was all white, indigenous British community. They didn't have anyone else to hate. There was only me. So I served an important purpose in that community. I was the town buff. And if you wanted to hate anyone, well, there's Clinton. But I overcame my fear and I went into the Acorn. Now, I was reading about somebody who sat in the parking lot of an MCC church for 4 hours before actually going in and seeing the pastor. I can identify with that. When I was in the Church of England, I must have passed by MCC LA, 50 times when I was in Los Angeles, before eventually I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to make that leap of faith and aside all my prejudices about Metropolitan Community Church, because I had a load of prejudices. I was a priest in the Church of England, for goodness sakes, been ordained in St. Paul's Cathedral. What was I going to have to do with this play church? Terrible, snobbish prejudice. But that's what I've been taught to believe. And you know, I walked into that church, and for the first time in my life, I found a real church. That grand cathedral in London was not a real church. It was a place people went to make themselves feel socially superior to everybody else. The church I was ordained into had long ago ceased to function as a real church. It had become the last dregs of the spiritual branch of the British Empire. That's what the Anglican Communion had become. the last gasp, sucking air of the corrupt remnants of the British Empire at prayer. And then I walked into MCCLA, having leapt over my fear and my prejudice and my snobbery. And of course, why did I establish all that snobbery and dislike and hatred? Well, it's because I was frightened of something. I was frightened that my only source, my wellspring of everything that I used to make myself feel important and get through life, was being challenged by the concept that that blockish-looking building that didn't even look like a church in West Hollywood was more like a real church than all the grandeur and opulence of the Church of England. Fear is a terrible thing. Fear is a terrible thing. Fear is at the root of almost all the horror and the war and the prejudice and the holocausts and the hatred that have afflicted our society. It's because fear works so perniciously within us that it encircles us and restricts us and binds us up and prevents us from becoming fully us. You know, there's a wonderful poem which you may well have heard. It puts a different slant on the concept of fear. It says, our worst fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be so brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are we not to be? You're a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There is nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are born to make manifest the glory of God within us. It is not just in some of us, it is in everyone, and as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates other people. When I was in Burnt Oak, there was a 80-year-old lady who was a shut-in. She was housebound, not just because of her health, although her health was bad. The main reason she was shut-in was because she was afraid to leave the house. And because she was afraid to leave the house, she had constructed a world in which it was reasonable for her never to leave the house. So she told herself that the streets were awash with evil people who would kill her and murder her and steal everything she had. That her neighbours were terrible people that would hurt her. That the new people who had moved into Burnt Oak, who were all a different colour to her, were terrible, wicked people. And they were only out to get what they could, and they were out to rob her and thieve what was rightfully hers. Now, why had she come out with all this hatred? To justify the fact that she was afraid to leave her house. We construct hatred to protect ourselves from fear. Now, in human beings, there's either a fight or a flight mechanism. Now, when we want to respond to the flight mechanism, when we are frightened, and we do not think it's right or socially acceptable to be frightened, then we turn it into hatred. We turn to fight. We cover it with bluster. So the people who frighten us, we then hate. And to cover the fact that we fear them, we demonize them. Adolf Hitler, in his early life, was frightened of the people that he saw in Munich as being really profoundly different to him. He turned a corner when he was a young man in the Orthodox Jewish quarter of Vienna, and he was so shocked and surprised by the otherness of the people that he met and their difference that he was frightened of them. And to cover the fact that he was frightened of them, he then began a process of constructing an elaborate edifice of hatred around those people that resulted in 6 million of them being exterminated in the Nazi war machine. Fear is not just something that afflicts us personally. It's something that poisons us and perverts us to such an extent that it doesn't only rob us of our full potential, it robs everyone else of our full potential. What we need to understand is that we ourselves, as the poem says, are glorious and extraordinary. We are the created creatures of God.